The summer of 1878 would forever be remembered as the beginning of the end for Cherry Creek, Colorado, a once thriving cattle town that now withered beneath a merciless sun that had not yielded to rain clouds for over 7 months. The drought had transformed the landscape into a wasteland of cracked earth and dying livestock, leaving desperation to fester in the hearts of those who remained. Olivia Zimmerman stood at the edge of her small parcel of land, watching as the last of her vegetable plants curled and browned in the relentless heat. At 25, she had already endured more hardship than most faced in a lifetime. 3 years ago, she had buried her father and inherited his modest homestead on the outskirts of town. Since then, she had managed to sustain herself through herbal remedies, a small vegetable garden, and a reputation as a healer that brought folks from miles around seeking her help. But that reputation had begun to sour as the drought persisted. Whispers followed her through town, hushed accusations that grew louder with each passing rainless day. "Miss Zimmerman," Sheriff Thompson called out as Olivia made her way down the main street toward the general store. "Got a moment?" Olivia tucked a strand of her auburn hair behind her ear, squinting at the lawman through the harsh sunlight. "Good morning, Sheriff. What can I do for you?" The sheriff shifted uncomfortably, his weathered face betraying his discomfort. "There's been some talk. Thought you ought to know." "What kind of talk?" Olivia asked, though she already knew the answer. "Folks are getting desperate. Some are saying, well, they're saying you've got something to do with the drought." He lowered his voice. "Old Widow Jenkins is telling anyone who'll listen that she saw you performing some kind of ritual at Cottonwood Creek right before the water started drying up." Olivia's chest tightened. "That's absurd. I was gathering willow bark for medicine." "I know that, Miss Zimmerman, but people need someone to blame. Just be careful is all I'm saying." As Olivia continued toward the general store, she felt the weight of eyes following her suspicious, frightened eyes. Cherry Creek had always been superstitious, but the drought had intensified that tendency to dangerous levels. Inside the store, the usual friendly chatter died as she entered. Martha Owens, the shopkeeper's wife, slid Olivia's order across the counter without meeting her gaze. "That'll be 70 cents, Martha said curtly. Olivia counted out the coins. "Any word on when the next shipment of flour might arrive?" "Not for you," came a gruff voice from behind. Olivia turned to face Silas Peterson, one of the largest cattle ranchers in the county. His face was flushed with anger beneath his wide-brimmed hat. "You've got some nerve showing your face in town, which—" Olivia stood her ground despite the trembling in her knees. "Mr. Peterson, I'm no more responsible for this drought than you are. My cattle are dying." 300 head lost already, he spat. "And it all started when you started brewing those potions of yours." "I make medicines, not potions," Olivia replied, struggling to keep her voice steady. "The same medicines that saved your wife from childbed fever last spring." Peterson stepped closer, his shadow falling over her. "Maybe we should have let nature take its course. Better to lose one woman than an entire town." The door swung open, flooding the tense space with harsh sunlight and the silhouette of a tall man. Yates Forrester entered, removing his hat to reveal sun-bleached brown hair and eyes the color of a stormy sky. At 30 years old, he'd only been in Cherry Creek for 8 months, working as the foreman at the Blackwell Ranch just north of town. "Seems like an awful lot of commotion for a Monday morning," Yates drawled, his deep voice cutting through the tension like a knife through butter. "This doesn't concern you, Forrester," Peterson growled. "This is between me and the witch." Yates stepped between Olivia and the rancher. "Funny, I don't see any witches here, just a woman buying supplies and a man making a fool of himself." Peterson's face darkened further. "You're new here. You don't know what she's capable of." "I know enough," Yates replied calmly. I know that blaming a woman for the weather is about as sensible as blaming your horse for the price of beans. He turned to Olivia. Miss Zimmerman, I believe I'm heading in your direction. Mind if I accompany you home? Olivia, stunned by the unexpected intervention, managed a nod. She gathered her purchases, aware of the hostile stares that followed them out the door. Outside, the heat hit them like a physical force. Olivia adjusted her bonnet to shield her face from the sun. Thank you, Mr. Forrester, but I'm afraid you've just made an enemy of Silas Peterson. He's a powerful man in these parts. Yates shrugged. Wouldn't be the first time I've rubbed someone the wrong way. He led his horse alongside her as they walked. Been meaning to ask you about a remedy for my horse anyway. Old boy's been favoring his left front leg. Olivia glanced at him suspiciously. Is that true, or are you just trying to give me a reason to let you walk me home? A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Can it be both? As they made their way down the dusty road that led to Olivia's homestead, she studied him from the corner of her eye. Yates Forrester had a reputation as a fair and hard-working man who kept mostly to himself. She'd seen him in town on occasion, but had never spoken more than a few words to him. You realize, she said quietly, that by defending me publicly, you've associated yourself with whatever madness they're attributing to me. Yates adjusted his hat. Miss Zimmerman, I've lived through droughts before. I've seen how people get when they're scared. They look for someone to blame, and it's usually someone who's different in some way. He glanced at her. What I haven't seen before is someone being willing to stand up to that kind of foolishness. Olivia sighed. I was born in Cherry Creek. My father was respected here. I've never been anything but a healer, using the knowledge my mother passed down before she died. Some folks fear what they don't understand, Yates said simply. They reached the gate of Olivia's small property. The wooden fence was weathered but still standing, enclosing a modest cabin with a vegetable garden that was struggling against the drought. A small barn stood to one side, housing her milk cow and a few chickens. Would you like to come in? Olivia found herself asking. I could look at your horse's leg, and I have some fresh mint tea. Yates nodded, tying his horse to the hitching post. Much obliged. Inside the cabin, Olivia moved with practiced efficiency, lighting the stove and setting water to boil while Yates stood awkwardly by the door, hat in hand. You've made a nice home here, he commented, looking around at the neat interior. Dried herbs hung from the rafters, and shelves lined with jars of various remedies occupied one wall. A small bookshelf contained more volumes than most households in Cherry Creek combined. It was my father's, Olivia replied, setting 2 cups on the table. He built it with his own hands when he married my mother. She paused. What about you, Mr. Forrester? Where do you call home? Yates, please, he corrected with a smile. And I can't say I've had a place to call home for some time. Been drifting from ranch to ranch since the war ended. The war? You fought, he nodded, a shadow crossing his features. Union cavalry. Spent 3 years riding across Virginia and Tennessee before taking a rebel bullet at Chattanooga. Olivia studied him with renewed interest. That explains the limp I sometimes notice. Only when it rains, he said with a wry smile, which hasn't been a problem lately. The tea kettle whistled, and Olivia busied herself preparing the drink. When she returned to the table, Yates was examining a small wooden carving of a bird. My father made that, she said. He always said I reminded him of a sparrow, small but resilient. Yates set it down carefully. Seems fitting. They drank their tea in comfortable silence before Yates asked, How bad has it gotten? The talk in town. Olivia's hands tightened around her cup. Today was the worst so far, but it's been building. At first, it was just old Widow Jenkins with her superstitions, but now. She swallowed hard. Now even sensible people like the Owens are turning cold. The sheriff warned me to be careful. And what exactly do they think you've done? Cast a spell to dry up the water, poisoned the clouds, angered the spirits. She gave a humorless laugh. Take your pick of nonsense. The truth is, this drought is hurting me as much as anyone. My garden is dying. My cow is giving less milk every day. Yates frowned. People should know better. Fear makes fools of us all, Mr. Forrester Yates, she corrected herself. And right now, Cherry Creek is very afraid. After finishing his tea, Yates insisted on examining Olivia's garden and offering what help he could. He dug a series of irrigation trenches that would make better use of her limited water supply and repaired a leak in her rain barrel. Not that it matters much without rain, he admitted, wiping sweat from his brow. It's the thought that counts, Olivia replied, handing him a dipper of water from the well. And speaking of which, let me look at your horse before you go. She examined the animal carefully, running her hands down its leg and observing its reaction. There's some inflammation in the tendon. I have a poultice that might help. She disappeared into the cabin and returned with a small jar. Apply this morning and evening for a week. If it doesn't improve, come back and see me. Yates tucked the jar into his saddlebag. What do I owe you? Olivia shook her head. Consider it payment for your help today. As he mounted his horse, Yates looked down at her with concern. Will you be all right out here alone? I've been alone for 3 years, Mr. Forrester. I can handle a few wagging tongues. He nodded, though he didn't look convinced. I'll check on you in a few days if that's all right with you. I'd like that, Olivia replied, surprising herself with her honesty. As Yates rode away, Olivia couldn't help but feel a strange mix of emotions. It had been a long time since anyone in Cherry Creek had shown her such kindness. Yet she couldn't shake the feeling that things were about to get worse before they got better. She was right. 3 days later, a fire broke out in the dry grass behind the church. Though it was quickly contained, rumors spread that Olivia had been seen near the area earlier that day. By nightfall, a group of townspeople had gathered in front of the saloon, their voices carrying on the still, hot air. Something has to be done about the Zimmerman woman, Silas Peterson declared to the crowd. First our water dries up, then fire nearly takes our church. What will be next, our children? Murmurs of agreement rippled through the gathering. Sheriff Thompson tried to maintain order, but his voice was drowned out by the angry shouts. I say we run her out of town, called someone from the back. Or worse, added another voice ominously. Yates Forrester stood at the bar inside the saloon, listening to the commotion with growing unease. He drained his whiskey and stepped outside just as the mob began to organize itself into action. Where do you think you're all going? He asked, his voice carrying over the crowd. Peterson turned to face him. This isn't your concern, Forrester. When a mob forms to threaten a woman who lives alone, it becomes the concern of any man with a conscience, Yates replied evenly. Sheriff, are you really going to let this happen? Sheriff Thompson looked uncomfortable. Now, Yates, no one's talking about harming Miss Zimmerman, just encouraging her to move on, with torches and pitchforks, seems mighty encouraging. Peterson stepped forward. My boy died this morning, 9 years old, and the fever took him because there wasn't enough water to break his fever. She did that, her and her witchcraft. Yates's expression softened slightly. I'm sorry for your loss, Peterson, truly, but blaming Miss Zimmerman won't bring your son back or make it rain. Get out of the way, Forrester, Peterson growled, or we'll assume you're in league with her. Yates placed his hand on his holstered revolver. I'm not looking for trouble, but I won't stand by while you threaten an innocent woman. The tension in the air was palpable as the two men faced off. Then, suddenly, a cry went up from the edge of town. Fire! Fire at the Zimmerman place! All eyes turned toward the horizon, where an orange glow was visible against the night sky. Without hesitation, Yates mounted his horse and galloped toward Olivia's homestead, the mob temporarily forgotten as they watched him race away. The scene that greeted him was one of chaos. The barn was fully engulfed in flames, and the fire was spreading rapidly toward the cabin. Olivia was desperately trying to lead her frightened cow away from the blaze. Yates leapt from his horse and ran to her side. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, her face streaked with soot. "I was asleep when it started. Someone must have set it." Together, they managed to secure the cow and the few chickens that hadn't fled. By then, several townspeople had arrived, drawn by the spectacle rather than any desire to help. They stood at a distance, watching as the barn collapsed in on itself with a thunderous crash. "Don't just stand there," Yates shouted. "Form a bucket line before the cabin catches." To his surprise, a few men stepped forward, including the blacksmith and the young telegraph operator. They began passing buckets from the well, but it was clear their efforts would be insufficient. "The roof's catching," Olivia cried, pointing to where sparks had ignited the dry wooden shingles of her home. Yates made a split-second decision. He lifted Olivia onto his horse and thrust the reins into her hands. "Ride to the Blackwell Ranch. Tell them what's happened. They'll help. What about you? I'll try to save what I can. Now go." Reluctantly, Olivia urged the horse forward, casting one last glance at her home as the flames began to consume it. By the time Olivia returned with help from the ranch, there was little left to save. The barn was gone, and the cabin was a smoldering ruin. Yates and the few townspeople who had helped were exhausted, their faces blackened with soot. "I'm sorry," Yates said as Olivia surveyed the destruction of her family home. "We couldn't stop it." She stood silently for a long moment, then squared her shoulders. At least no one was hurt. "You can stay at the ranch," offered Harold Blackwell, the owner. "We've got plenty of room and you'd be safe there." Olivia nodded gratefully, though her eyes remained fixed on the ruins. Who would do this? No one answered, but the suspicion hung in the air. Whether someone from the mob had broken away to start the fire, or whether it had been a tragic coincidence, the result was the same. Olivia Zimmerman was now homeless. At the Blackwell Ranch, Olivia was given a small room in the main house. Mrs. Blackwell, a kind woman in her 50s, provided her with clean clothes and a hot meal. "You poor dear," she clucked sympathetically. "To lose everything in a single night." "Not everything," Olivia replied. Thinking of the few treasured possessions Yates had managed to rescue from the cabin before it was fully engulfed: her mother's locket, her father's Bible, and the wooden sparrow carving. Later that evening, Yates found her sitting on the porch, staring out at the vast, dry landscape. "How are you holding up?" he asked, taking a seat beside her. "I keep thinking about my parents," she admitted. "All their hard work, everything they built, gone." "Buildings can be rebuilt," Yates said gently. "What matters is that you're safe." Olivia turned to look at him. "Why did you help me? You barely know me, and now you've made yourself a target too." Yates was quiet for a moment before answering. "During the war, I saw what happens when good people stay silent in the face of injustice. I swore I'd never be one of them." He paused. "Besides, I've always had a soft spot for sparrows." A small smile tugged at Olivia's lips. "Well, this sparrow is grateful." "Get some rest," Yates advised, standing up. "Tomorrow we'll figure out what comes next." What came next, however, was something neither of them anticipated. The following morning, a group of riders approached the Blackwell Ranch. At their head was Sheriff Thompson, looking deeply uncomfortable, and beside him rode Silas Peterson, his face a mask of grim determination. "They're here for me," Olivia said quietly as she watched from the window. Yates stood beside her. "They'll have to go through me first." Harold Blackwell met the riders at the gate, shotgun in hand. "What's this about, Sheriff? We've come for the Zimmerman woman," Peterson announced before the sheriff could speak. "She's to stand trial for arson and witchcraft." "Witchcraft," Blackwell scoffed. "What century do you think we're living in, Peterson? My boy is dead, my cattle are dying, and half the town nearly burned down last night," Peterson replied. "Someone has to answer for it." The sheriff cleared his throat. "Now, I don't hold with this witchcraft nonsense, but there are some questions about the fire. Several people claim they saw Miss Zimmerman in town yesterday making threats." "That's a lie," Yates said, stepping onto the porch. "She was here all day, helping Mrs. Blackwell with canning." "Isn't that right, madam?" Mrs. Blackwell appeared in the doorway. "That's right, Sheriff. Miss Zimmerman was here from sunup to sundown. It was a blatant lie and everyone knew it, but the Blackwells stood firm. Peterson was not deterred. The drought started when she began her ungodly practices. The fire happened the same night we were going to run her out of town. That's no coincidence." "And if it rains tomorrow, will you credit her for that too?" Yates challenged. "It won't rain," Peterson said with conviction. "Not until she's gone." The standoff continued until the sheriff finally raised his hands. "Look, I don't want any bloodshed. Miss Zimmerman, would you be willing to come to town peacefully and answer some questions about the fire? I promise you'll be treated fairly." Before Olivia could respond, a young rider came galloping up the road, waving frantically. "Fire!" he shouted. "Fire in town! The saloon and the feed store are burning." The group turned to see a plume of smoke rising from the direction of Cherry Creek. Without another word, the sheriff and his posse wheeled their horses and galloped back toward town. "How could there be another fire?" Mrs. Blackwell wondered aloud. "It's the drought," Yates explained. "Everything's like tinder waiting for a spark." Olivia stepped forward. "I should go help." "I know treatments for burns." "Are you crazy?" Yates exclaimed. "They just tried to arrest you." "They need me," she said simply. "And I need to show them I'm not what they think I am." Despite Yates's protests, Olivia was determined. In the end, he insisted on accompanying her, and the Blackwells sent 2 ranch hands as additional protection. The scene in Cherry Creek was one of desperate chaos. The saloon was beyond saving. Its wooden structure already collapsed, but townspeople were fighting to keep the flames from spreading to neighboring buildings. The dry conditions and light wind were making their task nearly impossible. Olivia immediately set up a treatment area for the injured, using supplies provided by the town doctor. She worked tirelessly, treating burns, smoke inhalation, and cuts sustained in the firefighting efforts. One of her patients was Martha Owens, who had burned her hands trying to save goods from the general store. "Why are you helping me?" Martha asked as Olivia gently applied a soothing balm to her reddened skin. "After how I've treated you." "Because you're hurt," Olivia replied simply. "And because this is what I do." By nightfall, the fires were finally under control, though much of the main street lay in ruins. Exhausted townspeople gathered in the church, which had been spared. Sheriff Thompson stood before them, his face streaked with soot. "I know everyone is looking for answers," he began, "and many of you have been quick to point fingers. But I think today has shown us that this drought is the real enemy, not each other." From the back of the room, Silas Peterson's voice rang out. "It's no coincidence that she was at the ranch when the fire started here. She used her witchcraft from afar." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, some agreeing, others expressing doubt. "That's enough," came a firm voice. Yates stood up, his tall frame commanding attention. "Miss Zimmerman has spent the day treating your wounded while you've been spreading lies about her. I've had enough of this nonsense." "You're sweet on her," someone called out. "That's why you defend her." "I defend her because she's innocent," Yates replied. "But yes, I admire her courage and her kindness in the face of your cruelty." The admission silenced the room. Olivia, who had been tending to a child with a minor burn, looked up in surprise. "Now, I propose we put this witch hunt behind us and focus on what matters, surviving this drought together," Yates continued. "Miss Zimmerman's knowledge of plants and medicines could be valuable to us all. Instead of driving her away, we should be grateful she's willing to help after how she's been treated." The room was quiet as his words sank in. Then, unexpectedly, Dr. Morgan stood up. "Forrester's right," he said. "Miss Zimmerman saved at least 2 lives today with her quick treatment of burns. That's not the work of someone who wishes harm on this town." Slowly, others began to voice their agreement. Not everyone was convinced, but the tide was turning. Even Sheriff Thompson seemed relieved at the shift in sentiment. As the impromptu meeting broke up, Yates made his way to Olivia's side. "You were amazing today," he said quietly. She looked up at him, fatigue evident in her eyes but a small smile on her lips. "Did you mean what you said? About admiring me?" "Every word," he replied without hesitation, "though I might have chosen a less public moment to make it known." Olivia's smile widened slightly. "I admire you too, Yates Forrester. Not many would have stood up for a stranger the way you have for me." "You're hardly a stranger anymore," he pointed out. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Harold Blackwell. "Town's not safe for either of you tonight," he said in a low voice. "Best come back to the ranch until things settle." As they prepared to leave, Silas Peterson approached, his face haggard with grief and exhaustion. "This isn't over," he warned, his voice barely above a whisper. "Rain or blood, something's got to fall soon." The threat hung in the air as they rode back to the Blackwell Ranch under a sky full of stars but devoid of clouds. The next week passed in an uneasy tension. Olivia continued to help the injured from the fire, gradually rebuilding some trust with the townspeople. Yates divided his time between his duties at the ranch and helping Olivia salvage what she could from her ruined homestead. During those days, their friendship deepened into something more. They shared stories of their pasts, Yates of his time in the war and his years of drifting afterward, Olivia of her childhood in Cherry Creek, and the knowledge of healing her mother had passed down to her. "My mother was like me," she confided one evening as they sat on the porch of the ranch house. "People came to her for remedies, but there were always those who feared her knowledge. When I was 10, a child died of fever in town. Some blamed my mother, said her medicine had poisoned him." She sighed. "History has a way of repeating itself." "What happened then?" Yates asked gently. "My father stood up for her, just like you did for me. He was respected in town as the blacksmith, and his word carried weight." She looked out at the darkening landscape. "But it changed her. She became more cautious, less willing to share her knowledge." "Is that why you lived so far from town?" Olivia nodded. "My father built our cabin on the outskirts after that incident, said we needed space from small minds." She smiled sadly. "He would have liked you, I think." "I hope so," Yates replied, tentatively taking her hand in his. "Because I've grown quite fond of his daughter." Olivia's fingers tightened around his. "I've grown fond of you too, Yates, more than I ever expected to." Their quiet moment was interrupted by the sound of approaching hooves. They both tensed, but it was only a ranch hand returning from town. "News from Cherry Creek," he announced as he dismounted. "They're holding a town meeting tomorrow, something about new water restrictions and—" He glanced at Olivia, "and resolving the witch situation once and for all." Yates's jaw tightened. "Sounds like Peterson's still stirring up trouble." "Actually," the ranch hand said, "it was the sheriff's idea. Says he wants to put an end to the rumors before someone else gets hurt. That night, Olivia couldn't sleep. She paced her small room, weighing her options. She could leave Cherry Creek behind, start fresh somewhere else. But the thought of abandoning her home, her parents' legacy, was painful. And now there was Yates to consider, a complication she hadn't anticipated but couldn't regret. A soft knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. She opened it to find Yates standing there, his expression serious. "I couldn't sleep," he explained, "and I saw the light under your door." She let him in, aware of the impropriety but beyond caring about such conventions. "I'm trying to decide what to do." "About tomorrow," she nodded. "Part of me wants to leave to escape the accusations and the fear. But another part wants to stay and fight," Yates finished for her. "I know the feeling." They sat side by side on the edge of the bed, their shoulders touching. "If I asked you to come with me," Olivia said quietly, "would you?" Yates took her hand. "In a heartbeat." "But I don't think running is the answer, Olivia. These people need to face their fear and superstition, and you deserve to clear your name." She leaned against him, drawing strength from his presence. "When did you get so wise, Cowboy?" He chuckled softly. "Must be all that time spent listening to you." As dawn broke, they had made their decision. They would attend the town meeting together and confront the accusations head-on. The town hall was packed when they arrived. It seemed everyone in Cherry Creek had come to witness the proceedings. Sheriff Thompson stood at the front, trying to maintain order as heated discussions broke out across the room. "Settle down, folks," he called out. "We're here to discuss facts, not spread more rumors." When Olivia and Yates entered, a hush fell over the crowd. They walked down the center aisle, heads held high, and took seats in the front row. Harold and Mrs. Blackwell joined them, a show of solidarity that did not go unnoticed. The sheriff cleared his throat. "As you all know, we've been facing a terrible drought. It's affected our crops, our livestock, and our livelihoods. Some of you have been quick to place blame on Miss Zimmerman here." Silas Peterson stood up, and with good reason. "The drought began when she started practicing her remedies." "That's simply not true," Dr. Morgan interjected. "Miss Zimmerman has been making the same medicines for years, just as her mother did before her. The drought is a natural phenomenon, not the result of some supernatural curse." The debate grew heated, with townspeople taking sides. Some defended Olivia, citing instances where her remedies had helped them or their families. Others supported Peterson, driven by fear and the need to find a scapegoat for their suffering. Finally, Olivia herself stood up. The room fell silent as she addressed the gathering. "I was born in Cherry Creek," she began, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "My family has lived here for 2 generations. I have never wished harm on any of you, even those who have accused me of witchcraft and burned my home." She paused, looking directly at Peterson. "I understand your grief and your fear. I truly do, but I am not the cause of this drought, nor do I have the power to end it." "Then who does?" someone called out. "No one," she replied simply. "Nature follows its own course. But we can face this challenge together, as a community, instead of turning against each other." Yates stood up beside her, his presence a comforting bulwark. "Miss Zimmerman lost everything in the fire, her home, her barn, her livelihood. Yet the next day she was here, treating the wounded without question or hesitation. Those are not the actions of someone who bears this town ill will." The room was quiet as his words sank in. Then Martha Owens rose from her seat, her bandaged hands visible to all. "She treated my burns," Martha said, her voice quavering. "Even after I was cold to her in my shop. I was wrong about you, Miss Zimmerman, and I'm sorry." One by one, others began to speak up: parents whose children Olivia had treated, farmers whose livestock had benefited from her remedies. The tide of opinion was shifting visibly. Silas Peterson watched in stony silence, his grief still raw, his need for someone to blame undiminished. But even he seemed to recognize that he was losing the support of the town. As the meeting was about to conclude, the doors burst open and a young boy ran in, soaking wet. "It's raining," he shouted, his face alight with joy. "It's raining hard." The room erupted in chaos as people rushed outside to witness the miracle for themselves. Sure enough, the sky had opened up, sending sheets of blessed rain onto the parched earth of Cherry Creek. In the joyous confusion, Yates pulled Olivia close. "See, not your fault and not your doing," she laughed, tears mingling with raindrops on her face. "I never thought I'd be so happy to get wet." The celebration continued well into the night. The rain fell steadily, not enough to end the drought immediately, but a promising start. For the first time in months, hope returned to Cherry Creek. Amidst the festivities, Olivia sought out Silas Peterson. She found him standing alone at the edge of town, watching the rain soak his fields. "Mr. Peterson," she said gently, "I want you to know how sorry I am about your son. No parent should have to endure such a loss." He didn't look at her for a long moment. Then, slowly, he nodded. "Thank you," he said gruffly. "I needed someone to blame. I see now that was wrong. Grief can cloud our judgment," Olivia replied. "I hope the rain brings healing to your land and to your heart." She left him there, knowing that true reconciliation would take time, but satisfied that a beginning had been made. The rain continued for 3 days, replenishing wells and streams, bringing life back to the parched land. During that time, Olivia began to plan the rebuilding of her homestead. To her surprise, many townspeople offered their help. "We owe you this much," Sheriff Thompson told her. "After what happened." Yates, of course, was the most dedicated volunteer. He spent every free moment helping Olivia design a new cabin, one that would be even better than what she had lost. "I'm thinking a bigger window here," he suggested one evening as they sat at the Blackwell's table, reviewing his rough sketches. "For your herbs to dry," Olivia smiled. "You've thought of everything." "Not quite everything," he replied, a sudden seriousness in his tone. "There's one detail I'm not sure about." "What's that?" Yates hesitated, then took her hand. "Whether it should be built for one person or two." Olivia's breath caught. "Yates, I know it's sudden," he said quickly, "and maybe it's foolish given everything that's happened. But these past weeks have shown me what kind of woman you are, Olivia. Brave, compassionate, resilient. I've never met anyone like you, and I don't want to let you go." Tears welled in Olivia's eyes. "Are you asking what I think you're asking?" "I'm asking if you might consider sharing your new home with a husband," Yates said, his voice steady despite the vulnerability in his eyes. "With me?" "Even after all the trouble I've caused you?" she asked, half joking. "Because of it," he replied earnestly. "Standing up for you was the easiest decision I've ever made. Loving you was even easier." Olivia leaned forward and kissed him softly. "Then yes, Mr. Forrester, I think we should build a home for two." The rebuilding of Olivia's homestead became a community project. Even Silas Peterson contributed lumber from his property. It was his way of making amends, though he remained a quiet, somber presence in town. The new cabin rose quickly on the foundation of the old. Larger and sturdier than before, it featured a special room for Olivia's medicines and remedies, and a covered porch where patients could wait out of the sun or rain. Through it all, Olivia and Yates grew closer. Their shared experience had forged a bond that deepened with each passing day. They were married in a simple ceremony at the Blackwell Ranch 6 weeks after the rain began, with most of the town in attendance. "Never thought I'd see the day when the so-called witch of Cherry Creek would become Mrs. Forrester, Mrs. Blackwell remarked with a twinkle in her eye as she helped Olivia prepare for the ceremony. "Life has a way of surprising us," Olivia replied, fingering the simple white dress she'd sewn for the occasion. "A few months ago, I couldn't imagine being accepted by this town again, let alone finding love." The ceremony was brief but heartfelt. Yates, standing tall and handsome in his best suit, couldn't take his eyes off Olivia as she walked toward him. Their vows were personal and sincere, promising support through whatever challenges lay ahead. "I will stand beside you always," Yates promised, his voice carrying clearly to all assembled. "In drought and in plenty, in sorrow and in joy. And I will heal what hurts and nurture what grows," Olivia responded, "in our home and in our hearts." The celebration that followed was joyous, a stark contrast to the tension that had gripped Cherry Creek only weeks before. People danced and feasted, celebrating not just the union of Olivia and Yates, but the renewal of their community. Late in the evening, as the newlyweds prepared to leave for their new home, now nearly complete, Sheriff Thompson approached them. "Miss Zimmerman, Mrs. Forrester, now, I should say I want to apologize again for not doing more to protect you." "You did what you could in a difficult situation," Olivia assured him. "And please, it's still Olivia to my friends." The sheriff nodded, then hesitated before continuing. "There's something else you should know. We found evidence about the fire at your place, boot prints leading away from where it started, matching a pair owned by Jeb Wilson." "Widow Jenkins's nephew?" Yates asked, surprised. "The same. He confessed after we confronted him. Said his aunt convinced him you were a witch who needed to be driven out." The sheriff looked deeply uncomfortable. "He's being held in the county jail now, awaiting trial." Olivia absorbed this information silently. Then she asked, "What about the fire in town? Was that him too?" "No," the sheriff replied. "That was truly an accident, a lamp knocked over in a drunken dispute at the saloon." After the sheriff left, Yates put his arm around Olivia. "Does knowing change anything for you?" She considered the question. "It confirms what we already knew, that fear and superstition can drive people to terrible acts. But it doesn't change how I feel about Cherry Creek, or about staying." "Good," Yates said, kissing her forehead. "Because I'd hate to have built that beautiful cabin for nothing." Their first night in their new home was perfect in its simplicity. Though there were still finishing touches needed, the essential rooms were complete. Yates carried Olivia over the threshold, then built a fire in the new stone fireplace while she prepared a simple meal. Later, as they lay together in their bedroom, listening to the gentle patter of rain on the roof, Yates traced the outline of Olivia's face with his finger. "Happy?" he asked softly. "More than I ever thought possible," she replied, nestling against him. "Who would have thought that being accused of witchcraft would lead to this?" Yates chuckled. "When I stood up for you that day in the general store, I was just doing what seemed right. I never imagined I was meeting my future wife." "Life has a way of working out, even through the hardest times," Olivia mused. "Like a drought that eventually ends in rain." 2 years later, Cherry Creek had fully recovered from the drought. Crops flourished, cattle grazed on green pastures, and the town itself had been rebuilt, better than before. Olivia and Yates's homestead had become a center of healing and learning. She had officially partnered with Dr. Morgan, combining her herbal knowledge with his medical training to provide the best care for the people of Cherry Creek and beyond. People came from neighboring towns to seek her remedies, and her reputation as a healer spread throughout the territory. Yates had taken a position as foreman at a nearby ranch, but spent much of his time improving their property. He'd built a new, larger barn, expanded the garden, and added beehives that produced honey for both medicinal use and trade. Their greatest joy, however, was their son, Thomas, born a year after their marriage. At 10 months old, he was already showing signs of his mother's curiosity and his father's determination. On a warm spring evening, they sat on their porch watching the sunset, Thomas sleeping peacefully in Olivia's arms. Silas Peterson rode up, leading a horse with a young colt following alongside. "Evening, Forresters," he called, dismounting stiffly. Though he had never become friendly, time had softened his bitterness, and he maintained a respectful relationship with the couple. "Mr. Peterson," Yates acknowledged, rising to greet him. "What brings you out this way?" Peterson gestured to the colt. "This little fellow was born last week. Thought he might make a good present for your boy when he's old enough to ride." He cleared his throat awkwardly. "My son would have been 11 now. He loved horses." Olivia's eyes filled with tears at the unexpected gesture. "That's a beautiful gift, Mr. Peterson. We'll make sure Thomas knows who it came from and the special boy it honors." Peterson nodded, clearly emotional but trying to hide it. "Well, I'll leave him in your care then. He'll need training, of course, but he's got good bloodlines." As Peterson rode away, Yates put his arm around Olivia and their sleeping son. "You know, when I first came to Cherry Creek, I never planned to stay long, just another stop on a long road." "And now?" Olivia asked, though she knew the answer. "Now I can't imagine being anywhere else," he replied, kissing her softly. "Or with anyone else." The colt whinnied softly as it explored its new surroundings, a symbol of new beginnings and healed wounds. Above them, clouds gathered on the horizon, promising more rain for the fertile land of Cherry Creek, a land no longer cursed, but blessed by the presence of a woman once feared, now respected, and the cowboy who had stood by her through the darkest drought. As the first drops began to fall, Olivia smiled. Rain or shine, drought or plenty, she was home. And home, she had learned, wasn't just a place, but the people who stood beside you when the world turned cruel.